often say to parents, like, if you were sitting at a restaurant now and eating a meal, and I sat there and went to you, come on, eat up, hurry up, come on, another mouthful, you'd be like, seriously, leave me alone. Like, I'm just trying to eat some food. Like, so again, that pressure can really build up in children. And if you've got a child that's struggling with food as well, having that applied pressure from a parent as well can cause them a lot more anxiety as well.
Mealtime battles with kids. Sound familiar? Many parents wrestle with picky eaters and food allergies, and it's a challenge that can test even the most patient among us. Today, I'm thrilled to have Emma Shafqat, a pediatric dietitian who doesn't just talk the talk, she's lived it as a mother. In this episode, we're diving deep into fussy eating, what it looks like, why it happens, and how to navigate it. We'll also tackle food allergies, the ups and downs of weaning, and simple, doable strategies to ease the tension at the table. Emma's bringing her dual perspective, part expert, part parent, to share her story, bust some myths, and offer must-know tips straight from her dietitian playbook. Whether you're prepping for parenthood, knee-deep in the weaning phase, or just trying to make mealtimes less of a struggle, this one's for you. Good afternoon, Emma. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I think especially parents listening now with younger ones, I've heard the term a lot, and I think people refer to it, but I don't think they know how deep it might go. If you don't mind starting out with like, what is fussy eating and how does it differ from just being a picky eater when it comes to kids?
So I would say in terms of fussy eating, I would say like your picky eating is your typical kind of toddler. They go through what we call the neophobic stage, which is like the fear of new foods that most children goes back to our hunter-gatherer days when children were more mobile, could pick up food. So therefore they have this kind of inbuilt genetic side that, they protects them from picking up potentially poisonous food. So most children go through that stage. Also, you also get the point where children wean beautifully, and then suddenly they hit about 1.5, and they start rejecting foods, which is kind of what we call, again, your typical kind of picky eating stage, because again, they grow slow, they get a bit more resistant, they can say no and things like that. So that's what I classify as your typical picky eating sort of stage. In terms of more sort of fussy, selective, restrictive eating, it is more, and also we often refer to it over here as like problem eating as well. So it tends to be when children are more restrictive in terms of what I often say is like they'll start to have sort of less than 20 foods. They might be quite selective in terms of the texture of the food. So they might only eat beige carbohydrates, for example, where they might also that they can't eat with the family. If you put new food down in front of them, they get very distressed. They can't necessarily be around the food. They might be quite sensory around food as well. So that's what I classify more as your kind of problem eater than your typical sort of fussy eater, that your typical kind of like picky eater that will eat kind of a wider variety of food. They might still have a preference for beige food, but it tends to be that they'll eat about 30 foods, and they'll eat from all the different food groups as well. So that, you'll have your carbohydrates, your protein, some fruit and veg, some dairy or non-dairy alternatives, and you've got all of those food groups. Whereas more of a problem eater will tend to maybe not eat one of those food groups, so they might not eat any fruit and vegetables, for example.
Okay, so it definitely plays more into the psychological component. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And also, again, like sensory aspects can often be a big part as well in terms of with problem eaters.
So how it smells, is that ever a factor?
Yeah. So how it smells, how it feels, all of your senses are involved as well in eating. It's a really complex thing that we do eating. We think it's really straightforward, but actually it's really, really complex.
So how does a parent who's listening might say, I kind of see this, but are there more common signs other than like, because you said that you're trying to get this many number of foods that they will eat, this many they won't, the sensory issue. How do you sort of start at the beginning to find maybe just common factors that maybe you do have a fussy eater?
So I would say if they start cutting out whole food groups, that's definitely a sign that your child's potentially struggling. Again, if they're quite sensitive with textures as well. So again, if they're rejecting foods that may be like a pureed type food, or they're rejecting anything that's like slightly got lumps in it or things like that. That could potentially be a sign that they're struggling with foods more as well. So it's more than just them sitting at a table and going, yuck, I'm not eating this broccoli. It's much more involved than that.
Is there a reason why some kids might be more, fussier than others? Or another way to look at it, could the parents enable any of this because of they think that that's what a kid should eat and they're not really giving them the freedom to explore more things, so they're more keeping them in a narrow path in terms of these are the foods I think you should eat because these are the foods I think are the best for you? I guess that's a two-part question. Why would kids be more fussier than others? And would the parents have any sort of responsibility in terms of potential enablement?
So I think in terms of some children being more fussy, again, it might be like I said with the sensory side. Some children like the children that are autistic as well, they can often struggle with different like textures as well. So again, yeah, it can definitely depend on the child as well. I think in terms of parent side, I think one of the biggest things is applying pressure and to children, with the kind of like, you must eat this, you must have one more bite, all of that pressure that's applied at a table to a child, that can have a really negative impact on a child as well and their eating. Because again, I often say to parents, like, if you were sitting at a restaurant now and eating a meal, and I sat there and went to you, come on, eat up, hurry up, come on, another mouthful, you'd be like, seriously, leave me alone. Like, I'm just trying to eat some food. Like, so again, that pressure can really build up in children. And if you've got a child that's struggling with food as well, having that applied pressure from a parent as well can cause them a lot more anxiety as well. So pressure is definitely a really big factor as well. And also, I think the thing where you're saying about the playing with food as well. I mean, again, years ago, it was, don't play with your food, don't touch your food. And actually, in terms of eating, there are actually like 32 steps to eating. So we think of eating as just picking it up and putting it in our mouths. But actually, because eating uses all of our senses, it's actually really important that children touch food and interact with food and smell food before they actually eat it. It's not a case of just picking it up and putting it straight in our mouths. So allowing children to play with food and touch food and cook food and do all of those things with food is a really, really important part as well.
You said 32 different?
Yes, 32 steps to eating.
Are there any that we might be surprised with? Obviously, you said the sensory and cooking and things like that, but there's a lot more.
Yeah, so I mean, basically, it's based on because I'm a feeding therapist as well as a pediatric dietitian, and there's this SOS feeding therapy. It's based around that and the 32 steps to eating. The first steps are just being able to sort of tolerate the food. So for some children that I work with who are really restrictive eaters, they might not even be able to be in the same room as a food. It might be completely overwhelming for them. So you would start at those steps, and those would be things like even looking at pictures of food in a book or colouring in a picture of food. It could be like that kind of level that I work with some children. Then you get like the next sort of chunk of steps, which is like your interaction steps. So that might be where you're able to use a fork, or you're able to use a toothpick, or you're able to, but you're not touching it directly with your hands. And then you might move on to the next step where you're able to touch it with your hands and they're able to play with it. And then you're kind of getting up to smell, and then you're getting up towards like, your face and mouth and all around there. And then there are actually loads of, I think it's like 18 little steps as well, from literally licking a food to literally swallowing a food. There's so many different, your taste buds, everything involved in eating as well. So I think that always surprises parents as well, because they're always like, well, just pick up food and put it in the mouth. And I had a lovely client today that I saw, and she was like, well, I asked her to put it on just like a lip salve, and she looked at me like I was strange. And I was like, yeah, but she hasn't touched the food, she hasn't cut the food up, she hasn't smelt the food, she's not going to necessarily just pick it up and put it towards her mouth. So it's kind of getting that understanding across as well.
So, is it an issue where you're seeing kids might be missing a certain section of those 32 steps, and that's where a lot of the problems lie? Or is part of your program trying to get them from 1 to 32 and is like second nature?
Yeah, so part of how I work with families, especially with like really restrictive eaters, is trying to work through those steps. And I tend to pick foods that maybe aren't in their diet, or they might be foods that they're already eating that are similar in texture, or different types of, it all depends on the child and the scale of where they are in terms of their restrictive eating. But yes, I often work with parents. It's kind of like a feeding therapy, and you kind of work through all these different steps to eating.
Is there a difference that you might notice with women that make breastfeed versus formula?
I don't really think so. No, I think the more way I like to think about it is like, for example, I'm dyslexic, so I struggle with reading and writing. And some children struggle with eating. Like, we don't expect a child to just be able to read and write. And sometimes other people need more help and support on that side. Whereas, as eating is such a complex thing, some children, like for example, my little girl really struggled with eating. She had really bad reflux as a baby. She had a cow's milk allergy. There were multiple things. She hated weaning, absolutely refused to put anything really near her mouth or in her mouth. So, like, her journey with feeding was already quite negative. So, you're not necessarily expecting her to have a positive relationship with food to start with. So, I feel like sometimes it's more that than necessarily to do with whether you've breastfed or formula fed. It's more to do with the experience maybe a child's gone through. And often you can track back trauma as to why a child has really struggled, or maybe they've choked on a food or really badly gagged on a food as well. Like, other things can happen in a child's life as well that can link to a negative association with food as well.
Yeah, I guess past triggers could, but if they're 1.5, it's very hard to figure out what if that's what it is, of course.
It's really hard.
You brought up your daughter, right? You said reflux, food allergies, right? How did you start to notice? Obviously, this is your expertise, of course, but for someone listening, like what was it about your daughter that you started to notice? And like the steps you took, there's food sensitivity testing and things you could do. But what about you specifically with her?
So in terms of her, she was struggling with really bad reflux. She basically stopped feeding at all, was screaming non-stop. So we actually ended up in hospital, and then they suggested potentially that it could be. To be honest with you, I didn't necessarily. I was kind of, because we don't have any kind of real history of allergies in our family, and firstborn, and you sort of feel like, no, it's fine, there's nothing really wrong, and then yeah, gradually her symptoms got worse and worse, and by about 3 months we ended up in hospital. And she was already premature and tiny already, so she didn't lose a lot of weight, but she was starting to lose a bit of weight as well, and she was already on like what we call the second centile, so really small already, so she didn't really have a lot of weight to lose to start with. So that's kind of how we noticed it. And she had what we call a delayed milk allergy as well. So you get your immediate allergies, which are when a child reacts within sort of like 2 minutes, very quickly within minutes to a food, whereas a delayed allergy is anything from 2 hours to 72 hours as well. But she did grow out of her milk allergy, and often for example, with delayed milk allergies, most children will grow out of it by the time they're school age. Not every child, but most children. She took till about 3.5 to grow out of her allergies. But in terms of tests for a non-ID allergy, so delayed allergy, you can't. Tests don't work. The only way you can do it is by eliminating foods. There are food sensitivity tests and things like that, but they're not accurate at all. So the only way you can do it is by cutting out the milk, either if you're breastfeeding from your diet.
What would be the amount that or duration that you would eliminate? Okay, so say cow's milk, for example. What's the process you went through with her? Like how many until she was, I guess around 3.5? You said it was sort of went away. But how do you test it in and out during the months?
So you do something called the milk ladder. I don't know whether they do the same in the US, but in the UK we use something called the milk ladder, and it's basically you do it from you normally wait 6 months post the reaction. So I waited till she was basically 12 months old, and then I started the milk ladder. And basically there's a 6-step milk ladder, and the first step is basically like really high baked things like biscuits, for example. So the proteins change because obviously it's heated at high temperature. And then basically it goes up all the way up to milk. And you've got sort of like muffins, pancake, cheese, yogurt, and you can gradually see the proteins, getting a whole protein in, so it's building up bit by bit by bit, basically, as you got the ladder. And we were stuck on about, I would say, step 3. So I couldn't do any like white sauces or pancakes or anything like that for years. We could do biscuits and we could do muffins. Once I hit anything, step 3, she would scream in pain, arch her back, be really uncomfortable. Yeah, it took us, and then suddenly she won't drink milk now, still thinks it's horrible, but she can have it, and she can eat cheese, and she eats yogurt, but she doesn't particularly like milk. But I can kind of see her association as far as she's concerned. It caused her pain in the past, so she's not particularly keen on it now.
Well, it could be that past, right? Trauma of the reflux and right coming back, and it's just something that you don't want to go through if you don't have to.
Yeah, exactly.
And you had mentioned weaning, and I think a lot of people probably understand the concept, but could you explain more in depth, like what it is and why it's important?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of weaning, we normally advise it around sort of 6 months of age. And this is partly because in terms of the children's iron stores, you normally have good iron stores from your mother when you're born up to about 6 months, and then the iron stores start to really drop. So iron is really, really important when you start weaning. So that's partly why it's around 6 months. Also in terms of development and everything else as well. So obviously you want a child to be sort of upright, pretty much stable-ish. I'm not sure my child was fully there, but reasonably stable. And using some good hand to mouth coordination as well. So you're looking for signs that they're ready as well. But normally we advise around sort of 6 months. But basically what we're trying to do is, again, we want to get iron-rich foods in because, again, their iron stores have really dropped as well. But also it's a chance for them to learn about food because, like I said, eating's a really complex process. So it's a chance for children to learn about eating. It's really, really important that you move through textures with weaning. A lot of parents get worried about choking and worry about that side, so they often don't give children other foods with lumps in, or maybe finger foods because they're worried about choking. But if you don't move through all the lumps and things like the textures as you get towards 12 months, you can risk your child struggling after 12 months, especially when you hit that neophobic stage. If they haven't been introduced to lots of lumps and things, they can be quite averse to not wanting to eat that kind of food as well. So it's a really important time.
So the iron stores specifically are what we're trying to almost replenish.
Yeah, in a way. And that's why we always say it's important to have like iron rich foods when weaning as well. You often hear that term, food before one is for fun. But actually, it's more important than that. It's not just about fun. It is about them learning. And to start with, yes, they won't eat large amounts of food and they will still have milk as their main source of nutrition. But as they get through, 12 months, we do want them to end up on kind of family style meals by the time they are 12 months old. But it's hard. I mean, I've hated weaning, so.
So that's going to be a very difficult time for a lot of parents.
Some parents love it, and some children absolutely take to it. And lots of parents I work with do. Their children wean beautifully. My child didn't, so I found it really stressful. But for a lot of people, it's not. And the children absolutely love it. And it's all about mess as well. I think that's the other thing that's really, really important, is making sure your child gets covered in food, and you're not just wiping their mouth every 5 minutes to get rid of all the food. And that's part of them learning. And that kind of goes back to what we were talking about in 32 steps, that touching, interacting, smelling food is part of the learning process as well.
That's interesting you said that, because you see people that are very like diligent. As soon as something spills, they just wipe it right off, or the kids, they're changing the bib, and it's just like, I understand what you're saying now. Just like let them just be in the moment and enjoy it and understand what they're doing in the process.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's really, really important. And I think, a lot of time I see it where they're just constantly wiping faces, and you're like, no, the mess needs to be embraced. As annoying as it is as a parent to clear up, the mess is part of it.
All the clean, obsessed people are probably listening. Oh my gosh, no, I can't do that. Get on the phone, right? It's all over the floor. So the first year the baby's born, right? Are there other steps parents can take to sort of encourage these habits? I know obviously your whole SOS, the 32 steps. Is there anything you could do to minimize like food allergies, or is that something where it's going to happen or regardless?
In terms of food allergies, so there's been quite a lot of changes in research. I mean, previously, before they used to say, pregnant women not to have peanuts and, not to feed children peanuts before 12 months old. But there is more and more coming out that actually we should be introducing the allergens, and all the allergens should be introduced before 12 months as well. And especially in children that are high risk. There is more studies that are showing that, things like egg and peanuts should even be introduced early as well, and even a little bit before, potentially from 4 months to 6 months as well, in the higher risk children as well. So yeah, getting those allergies, those key allergens in is really, really important in those first 12 months as well.
So even though you might say, okay, my other kid had peanut out, let's just, like you said, eggs, peanuts, maybe the older sibling had that. Is that something the parent might need to be concerned with, or is it sort of not related?
No, definitely it is related. If there's a genetic or family history, then there definitely, yeah, it definitely is a higher risk. Yeah.
Siblings, allergies, and reactions can play a part in the younger ones, or vice versa.
Yeah. Often it's family as well. So, like the dad or the mum or someone's got some kind of knife, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your child will. So it is still important that it's introduced as well. But yeah, it does run in families as
The
well.
higher risk, yeah.
Yeah.
How parents and even healthcare providers, how have they traditionally approached fussy eating? Is it the medical community has almost like different advice depending on who you're going to, or is it here's the baseline and they all kind of treat it one way? Because you have a much more elaborate approach that I've not heard of. But traditionally, like, how has the system taken care of this?
So I think if it's a typical what I call the neophobic stage toddlers, I would say to start with, the best thing you can do is get them involved in sort of messy play with food, away from meal times, get them interacting with new textures, exposing them to food. And that's kind of the best way. Get them also eating as a family. So again, family meals together, because kids copy your parents. And often at that stage, because they've got this fear of new foods, they often want to eat off your plate. And some parents I see are like, oh, I don't want them eating my food. I don't want them touching my food. Actually, it's really important that they do eat off your plate if they want to, because they see your plate as being safe, and they're not, even though you've got exactly the same food on the same plate, as far as they're concerned, this could be poisonous, but mummy's just eaten the food off her plate and nothing bad's happened to her, so therefore the food must be safe, so I'll just eat what's off mummy's plate because she's still okay and she's not suddenly got really ill. So that's why you should let your children eat off your plate. You should eat together as much as you can as well, because they copy you, they model you, they see you eating that food as well. So that's kind of where I would always start with your kind of really typical toddler fussy eating stage, and sort of working from there. And then obviously if you've got a child that's got is much more restrictive in terms of, cutting out the food groups and everything I said before, then I would be much more going down the sort of steps to eating approach, potentially like food. I use a lot of food chaining as well, which is where you take a similar food and you might make a tiny, what I call like a just noticeable difference. So, for example, something like pasta, you might go from pasta to pasta with butter and cheese, to then pasta with a tiny bit of, like chicken or, turkey or whatever it is grated on it, to then maybe you grate a tiny bit. But it's like these tiny, tiny little changes bit by bit by bit. So again, with a really restrictive child, I would take a completely different approach to potential. Although a lot of the advice that again you use for your typical fussy eater is often relevant as well in terms of the family style meals and things like that as well.
Now, when you find out a child might have an issue with, like you said, lumpy food or whatever it might be, but they don't have an allergy to it. There's no reflux. There's no issues in that. And what's sort of the approach? Do parents sort of take it off their plates as well, or how do you do that when you have a family and maybe one child and you have a few? Is it basically the lumpy food, for example, is a real issue for them? Is it bad for them to see it on other plates as well around them at the table?
No, so it obviously depends on the child, because again, like I said, with the children that can't tolerate a food, then it might cause distress. But no, it's important that you still have like, and I always recommend to parents as well, is you have an empty plate for your child and you have the food in the middle of the table as well. And that children can serve themselves as well. So one thing that a lot of parents do is put loads and loads of food on a plate for a child. It can be quite overwhelming for them. The other thing to do is, it's really, really important, again, with children, is that you have some kind of safe option or preferred option that they can eat. You never want to give a child a meal where all the food on that plate is something that they've never eaten, they can't eat, because all that's going to do is cause their cortisol levels to rise. they're going to become distressed, and then they're not going to eat. And again, if you look back over thousands of years, when we eat, we need to be in a relaxed state, because if we're in any kind of danger or sense of danger, and if you think in terms of evolution, we've not changed in thousands of years, our danger would have been a tiger chasing us in, thousands of years ago. So if our body perceives danger, cortisol levels go and we go, right, we don't need to eat food, we need to be fast, and we need to get away from this danger. And I know it sounds crazy in today's society, or maybe it doesn't, I don't know, the world's quite crazy at the moment.
Agree.
It just is so important that children are relaxed when they're eating, and the more you apply the pressure, the more stress there is around the meal, the less chance you've got of eating. And I think it's the same for anyone. It's a bit, if I was to say to you now, right, you're going to sit an exam in the next half an hour, but first of all, I want you to eat like a 3-course meal, you'd probably be like, no, I'm not really that hungry. I feel quite nervous. I don't really feel like eating. And that's why it's so important. The more relaxed a child is, the more chance you've got of them eating more food as well.
So would that be, if someone's trying to pick up like strategies for helping their kid become more adventurous, is that where you would start, keeping everything in a relaxed state, or where would you advise to begin with?
So I would say meal times are about the calories and about getting the safe food in. So I often say to parents that dinner time is not the best time to try a whole load of new foods. Your child is probably unregulated. They are probably tired from school or wherever they've been, or preschool. You are probably not going to achieve getting them eating a piece of broccoli at that time of day. So I would say the meal times are about the calories. You get the preferred food. You still do your family style meals. You still have the broccoli on the table. You can still serve mum, all of those things. I would say the exposure to the new food and adventure around new food. I did this a lot with my little girl. We have something, I don't know if you have we have Strictly Come Dancing here, which I think is like Dancing with the Stars over in America.
Sure.
Yeah. So we did each week, this is going to sound a bit crazy. We did each week, we picked a new food, so a new fruit or a new vegetable or whatever it was. We found a recipe, we made it, and then we experimented with it and tried it whilst watching Strictly. And we did that every week for like however many weeks Strictly's on, like weeks or whatever it is. And my little girl absolutely loved it. And she tried like kiwi, she ate like pomegranate. If I'd just put that on a plate at, dinner time, she'd have gone, yuck, I don't like that, I'm not eating that. And that would have been the end of it. But because you do it in a really fun way and it's not at a meal time, they get to explore the foods. And again, like I was saying, with the 32 steps, we cut it up, we found a recipe, we smelt it. And some weeks you didn't want to eat it, and that's fine as well. Like, your child's not necessarily going to go from touching it or seeing it for the first time to suddenly eating it. But the fact that we made it fun and it was an adventure, you can see how she'd automatically be more relaxed than if you were trying it at dinner time. So therefore, she was much more open to trying it as well. So I love things like where you can get a child's interest in something they really enjoy and do it that way.
I feel like creating like a fun event around it is.
Yes.
Yeah, that sounds fun. No, that's a great idea, because I think you have the kids that, again, it might just become monotonous. Now they have something to look forward to. Now it's going to be 6 days from now. We just did it tonight. Next week we're going to do this, and they kind of build up some excitement. So it's creating that energy and that enthusiasm around, I want to have this experience. It's also introducing these foods to them. So that's very clever.
Yeah, it works really well as well. I definitely recommend it for parents. If there's anything your child's interested in, or program, or any like dinosaurs or anything they're really into, and you can create something around it, the better.
How about weaning? Are there practices that you might say this could help with maybe a smoother transition?
In terms of weaning, I think it's about exposure. So it's about, lots of different flavors, using your herbs and spices, just as many flavors as you can, and working through those textures as well. Because again, in weaning stage, they shouldn't necessarily be in that really fussy kind of eating stage. They should be more open. Often I find children more open to trying new foods when they're weaning than actually when they're toddlers as well.
Maybe you're a parent listening and they're saying, okay, I have tried everything. I've tried this, I've tried that. We've maybe they're working with someone like as skilled as yourself, and nothing's really working. Where do you go from there with the parent? Is there like I know you said like maybe the sensitivity tests and stuff like that, they're not as accurate, but when they're trying these and you're going through all your steps, what happens when things just aren't working? Where do you sort of direct them at that point?
So I think normally you can identify something. There's normally somewhere that you can work. So even like with some of the children I work with who are autistic, can't be in the same room, haven't, there's something called ARFID, which is like an eating disorder as well. So even if you can just connect with them and be around them. So even if you're sitting on a sofa and having their food with them or having their favorite food, even if you can start just creating a positive connection with food, and it might be that you're at the tolerate step. Maybe you just read some books about food, or you just learn about food. So there's normally always somewhere that I can slowly work something in, or we can start to improve things a little bit. But it all depends completely, on the child. I mean, I'm talking more extreme, examples there. But I would say with most kind of eaters that will eat different food groups, there's lots of things you can do. And also the other thing I would say as well is looking, because when I work with clients, I do a full dietary assessment. So often I can look at their diet, and if they're low in something like iron and zinc, that can really affect appetite as well. Or if they're really constipated as well, that can really affect their appetite. So sometimes there's other things going on as well. And once we get them on a good multivitamin that has some iron and zinc, and sometimes appetite starts to improve as well. So normally there's often things I can find that we can make some improvements or help a child.
So how about something, whether as a parent or in your practice, something unexpected that you've come across that maybe help reshape your approach and what you do?
Oh yeah, that's a hard one. In terms of, yeah, because I've seen so many children, because I worked a lot with tube fed children as well. So I have had a tube fed child who was what we call ARFID as well. So didn't eat anything. Well, I think the only thing he ate was crisps, and that was it. And he did end up being tube fed, and then he was really, really underweight as well, about 20 kilos or something underweight. And the tube feeding made a real difference because it kind of brought back his hunger and fullness cues and everything else. And then eventually he's still got the tube in for medication, but otherwise he is now eating all these different foods. And like, it's absolutely blown me away because he's gone from eat absolutely nothing. So I feel like sometimes in terms of nutrition, it's the impact of a child actually eating again, and how much that can create such a positive thing that actually sometimes it can change the situation completely as well.
So when kids are in this distress state, is there ever a scenario where the parents just don't even know that it's happening? Like, do you ever come across that maybe finally they go to their pediatrician at that point and they just keep giving them the same thing and the cycle never stops?
Sometimes, but I would say most parents are quite intuitive. Eating is quite a stressful experience for most parents, and you've got to do it like 5 times a day. So I think for a parent not to notice at all that their child is having an issue, and also if they're at school or they're interacting with friends, parents are going to get lots of comments from lots of people. So most parents I see are already really distressed, and they're already worried in the first place as well. So they tend to be aware that something's intuition that something's not quite right with their child's eating.
I would imagine, right? Especially when it comes to school and you have other teachers and stuff that are chiming in. How about if you could say, wave a magic wand and change one habit around meal times? What do you think that would be to make it easier for kids to eat?
I would say it's pressure. So I would say parents applying pressure at meal times is often one of the biggest things. And I know we don't intend to do it because we're coming from a place of love and we want our child to try new foods and we want them to explore new foods. And as far as we're concerned, we know it's nice and everything else. But I would say pressure is one of the worst things that you can do. And if you can take that pressure away from meal times, that for me is the biggest, makes often is the first place to start, and it often makes the biggest difference as well.
You mentioned autism. Obviously, I'm in California. I think it's like 1 in 22 kids have it. So I would imagine, like in your practice, you come, and again, it might be different in the UK, but statewide, I believe it's like 1 in 36, something pretty drastic. When it comes to that, obviously that child has been diagnosed and things like that. But Are you seeing things sort of like where these two worlds are sort of marrying together in the sense of what you do and then what these therapists do to at least make eating a better experience for these kids?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I work a lot in like what we call a multidisciplinary team. So I work with a lot of, I did a group program where we worked with an OT as well, so occupational therapist as well. So again, very much specialising on the sensory side around food as well. So yes, we definitely work as a team, and the more you can work with a team, the better as well, because we're all specialists in certain areas. And again, you might work with a speech and language therapist who might look at like oral motor skills as well. So again, if a child, often with eating, sometimes when a child's struggling with eating, there's something going on. It might be something medically, it might be something sensory. So again, if a child's got something wrong with their oral motor skills or they haven't developed those properly, again, there could be an issue around there that speech and language could help. I work with play therapists as well. So again, they might do loads of play around food as well. So yeah, I feel like, yeah, it's coming from like lots of different professionals as well. And then you might have a pediatrician that, especially if a child's not growing well, that they might oversight the growth as well.
So you can kind of work in that capacity with all of those people to sort of, have a team together for making sure the kids getting everything they need from all angles. How about like one myth to dispel about kids and their eating habits in the journey you've had so far? What would that be if you had to pick one?
I would say my biggest myth is probably the whole like not letting children play with food. That's the real myth that parents have, that you shouldn't play with your food, you shouldn't interact with food. I get so many parents, and I also get this, makes me always really sad, is when nurseries, spend ages saying, oh, their child has to use the cutlery, and it's like, they're 2 years old, like they don't need to use cutlery at 2 years old, like they can touch food and interact with food. So for me, that's one of the biggest myths, is that you can't play with food.
That blew me away too, because I always, again, you always have that image in your head of the friend you have or whatever that's constantly cleaning up after their kid as they eat. Now I know that's kind of the opposite approach you want to take. But, depending on the kid, of course. Maybe a family is just they're listening, they're starting to realize, okay, we're in this journey in the beginning. We know this is what's going on with our child. What's the place you would start for something small in the first week to sort of like build momentum for their child and, of course, themselves to see that it's working?
So I would say, obviously, depending on the child and what the situation is, I would say, so the first thing, one of the things I would do, and this is the thing that often is overlooked, is look at how your child's sitting at the table as well. Because again, lots of parents go from a high chair and then they just put their child in a normal adult chair as well. And the thing is that in terms of how it works with eat, so our body's main priority is breathing. If we can't breathe, we can't eat. And if we're ill or we've got a cold or something, it affects our eating as well. The second most important thing our brain wants to do is postural stability. So our brain likes to be stable, it likes to be pretty upright. So if your child is sitting in a chair, and it's a bit like you can do this yourself as a parent as well. If you go to a bar and you sit in those bar stools and you haven't got your feet supported, and even if you lifted your feet off the ground now and you just kind of sit, you use quite a lot of your core to kind of just keep yourself stable. So if you've got a child that's already struggling with eating and then they're sitting really uncomfortably, they're not happy in their chair, they're moving around and everything else, you're already making a little barrier to them being able to eat. So what I always say to parents is try and check and look how your child's eating. What you want them to sit in is a 90-90 angle. So we want their feet on the floor, if not some kind of footstool, or we have something called, I don't know, you have it there, but we have something called like a trick track type chair. It's kind of like a toddler kind of chair that you can kind of grow with your child basically, and it's got all the different sort of stages. But you want their feet supported, you want their knees at some 90 angle and their hips at roughly a 90 angle. So you want them all sitting and supported, and sometimes that can make a really big difference. And it's really small, but it can really affect your child's ability to come to a table and be able to eat food. And I know with my little girl, it made a big difference because she's so tiny. Again, I put her in an adult chair, didn't really think about it, but actually she's so much better because she's supported and in a proper chair. So that's where I would start, as a tiny little thing. Just have a little look at how your child's sitting.
Can kids intuitively make food choices at this young age? Can they listen to their bodies? At what point or how can the parents teach them so when they get older, they know, okay, listen to your body, make these good choices for what's good for you. You might say this kid is lacking this vitamin or that. Can these parents be teaching this at this point so later on in life kids can make intuitive choices on their own?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would say most toddlers and most young children are quite intuitive eaters. They tend to eat to what we call their nutritional requirements. When I do dietary analysis on children, like they will bang on pretty much reach their calories in terms of like, there's if they are growing well and they are tracking their centiles, they tend to eat to their requirements. You haven't been influenced by like diet culture or any of those external factors, and basically, at that age, your brain needs glucose, and this is why toddlers and stuff prefer beige carbohydrates because their brain is growing quickly. So and their brain needs glucose. So there is that intuitive eating. What I would say with parents is there's so many books and there's so many great like cooking shows and all these things that you can teach your children about food and learning about food and even getting like a tower that your child can stand on, the children's knives as well. All of those things and getting them involved in the kitchen really, really young can be a really good way of helping them learn about food. And even like at this time of year, like, going to like farms and picking like strawberries or like, I mean, it's probably different in California over here at the moment, picking like going and picking food and just, seeing food, farmers markets, all of those things as well. They're all opportunities to learn about food.
It becomes something where the kids are looking forward to it. And if you can incorporate, right, picking good food and whole foods and fruits and vegetables, it just creates that positive experience. Do you personally work with people globally?
Yeah, I do. I work with people mainly in the UK, but I have worked with people in Canada and America as well. Yeah.
How do you work with someone one on one?
So I always work virtually unless they're literally round the corner from me, which most people aren't. So, in the UK, yeah. So I work on virtually in terms of on Teams and stuff, and I adapt the practice for them. So I give them a really good plan and strategy that they can do at home. And then I provide unlimited like email support as well. So they can email me as much as they need to ask any questions as well.
In the beginning, it's like an assessment of what you go through, what's going on in their life, and then put together a plan based on that.
Yeah, so basically what I normally do is get them to send me videos of meal times as well, so I can get a good idea of what's going on at home. How's the child reacting? Is there anything else happening? And then I normally get them to complete like a dietary assessment as well. So I'll get them to put in like 3 days of their food intake first, analyze all of that before we meet, so that I can see what are they low in, what nutrients are we missing, and then yeah, meet with them and then put together a plan as well, and then we adapt it as we go on as well.
How would someone get in touch with you? What would be the best website?
So in terms of my website, it's dietitianwithadifference.co.uk, or on Instagram, I'm dietitian.withadifference. And it's dietitian spelt the UK version, not the American
Yes.
version.
I'll clarify that in the show notes for sure. Thank you so much for your time today. I truly did learn a lot. Oh, just amazing takeaways. So thank you for sharing all that. And great to meet you. I will make sure all this is in the show notes for people who want to reach out.
Thank you so much for having me. It was lovely to talk to you.